I am the Emperor, king among kings. I have trampled more beneath than any other in this world. I am the one and only fundamental in this world of filth. Similar sentiments have been conveyed by many oppressors in the realm of fiction as well as fact, but none have so nakedly embraced it as the supreme emperor of the Kushan Empire. It can be said that the setup for Ganishka began in chapter 41 of the manga, where we meet the man called Salat during a tournament Guts attends. At first, it appeared as though this exotic man was added to the series just so the king of Midland could have a quirky squad of assassins dispose of his biggest enemy. The Kushan became the biggest threat to Midland since the 100-Year War, with the Tudor Empire within a day of the dreaded fall of St. Albion, and it was all because of one man's ambition to conquer the world and fear of facing it by himself. Ganishka's reveal was a slow burn that paid off in monstrous proportions, and we do mean that literally. So without further ado, this is Emperor Ganishka's origins, explored. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. But first, a short history lesson. Ganishka's historical influence and the actual Kushan dynasty. Unlike most other characters in Berserk, Emperor Ganishka has a clear real-life counterpart that series creator Kentaro Miura drew inspiration from, and that is the real-life Kushan king Kanishka. Kanishka's origins and history are shrouded in mystery, but what is known is that he created one of the largest and most prosperous empires to exist in Central and East Asian history. At the zenith of his power, his influence stretched from Tibet to Greece, and King Kanishka was renowned not just for his military prowess, but also his spirituality. On the coins that have been discovered by archaeologists with his impression on them, Kanishka is always depicted as carrying a sword on his waist, a lance in his left arm, and making a sacrifice with his right hand as flames cover his shoulders. This hints that his empire practiced religious syncretism, as many of the symbols used in the coinage were a mixture of various faiths and cultures. But the one religion with which he has distinct ties is Buddhism. Kanishka is a central figure in the story of Buddha. He is depicted as a tyrannical king who has a hot temper and was fiercely rigid when it came to enforcing his rule of law. Upon meeting a bhikshu who showed him the consequences of what would happen if he continued down his path by giving him a glimpse into hell, Kanishka cried out in terror and repented for all of his sins, thus becoming self-actualized for the first time in his life. Thereafter, it appears as though Kanishka became an ardent promoter of Buddhism. He is said to have headed the Fourth Buddhist Council, which was hosted in present-day Kashmir, and also erected a stupa that the Buddha himself was said to have preordained, the Kanishka Stupa, which was located in present-day Peshawar, also the historical capital of the Kushan dynasty. His kingdom's strategic placement along both naval and sea choke points of the Silk Road allowed for Buddhism to spread from Gandhara to China, and Kanishka is still remembered as a reverent king and a champion of the religion, despite having verifiably walked the path of syncretism. But this enigmatic king of kings is not the only one we meet in Berserk, because Miura's Ganishka is notably more influenced by Hindu mythology than Buddhism. From the imagery used to depict his own life down to the demons he uses in his army, all of it bears a distinct Hindu influence, and so it will be a mistake to say that Ganishka and Kanishka are essentially one and the same. Because in Buddhist legend, Kanishka repented for his sins after getting a glimpse of hell, but in Berserk, Ganishka's cries of desperation were answered by demons who turned him into one of them. So let's end this history lesson here and get to the dreaded demon king who dared to fight against the Falcon of Light, shall we? He surfaces on the pages of Berserk slowly like some kind of terrible elder god, the build-up to Ganishka's appearance. Let's go back to the man we mentioned in our intro and explain why his appearance on the pages of Berserk is so important. Salat is the first Kushan we see in the story, and it is immediately crystallized in our minds that the word Kushan doesn't just refer to an empire, it also refers to a people. Though Salat is from the Baki Raka clan, whose own tale of being ostracized and banished from their lands is because of the actions of earlier Kushan rulers, he is still seen as Kushan by anyone who meets him outside of the empire, and is not aware of its social structures. In short, Kushan is an ethnicity in Berserk as much as it is a political sovereignty, and Salat's involvement goes beyond a tournament defeat to Guts. The young master of the Baki Raka clan exhibits immense proficiency in hand-to-hand and melee combat at the aforementioned tournament, which takes place in chapter 41, but is thwarted by Guts nonetheless, thanks to the swordsman's impeccable skill at wielding the unwieldy Dragon Slayer. He returns to attack the band of the Falcon in the following chapter, both as a means to collect the bounty on their heads, but also in an effort to test his own skills as a fighter. He is once again attacked by Guts, and despite using exotic weapons like the Chakram, the Katara, and the multi-bladed Urumi, he loses to the Black Swordsman once again, being humbled into retreat, but not before gaining a grudging respect for his foe. The next time we see Kushan emerge in the story is at the end of chapter 55, when the King of Midland summons 5 Bakiraka assassins he has under his employ to assassinate the escaping Griffith and bring back Charlotte to him safely. These 5 assassins fight Guts and his party in the sewers of Windham, and though each of them possess exotic and unnerving fighting styles, Guts, Judo, Casca, and Pippin managed to dispatch of all of them, except the woman Bakiraka, who escorted Charlotte back to the castle. She was dispatched of by the king himself for allowing Charlotte to be harmed. But this is the last time we see Kushan appear in the story for nearly 80 chapters, and when they do return, that is when Ganishka's influence is felt more keenly in the story. In chapter 133, we learn that following the King of Midland's death, the kingdom faced a twofold epidemic of disease and violence. Near the holy city of St. Albion, the God Hand member Conrad engineered the appearance of a deadly plague, which served as the starting point of the incarnation ceremony's preparations. At the same time, Kushan scouts belonging to Silet's Bakiraka clan had begun invading Midland in preparation for the main Kushan army's arrival. The scouts easily took down a band of mercenaries in a town where a young thief named Isidro had been trying to survive the dying kingdom's death throes all by himself. When they discovered him, the scouts tried to kill Isidro as well, but Guts' arrival put an end to all of that. He easily cut through every scout in the area, impressing the young boy and becoming his idol, unaware that his entire fight was being watched by the same man he had defeated in a tournament a long time ago. Salat, the leader of the Bakiraka and the Kushan scouting contingent, broods over letting Guts escape after having several of his men killed by the Black Swordsman, but insists that they must continue to the Land of Oracle. Supposedly, Salat had been sent on a personal mission to confirm some kind of vision by his master and lord, and that mission took him to St. Albion, the site of Femto's incarnation into the physical world as Griffith. We see the Bakiraka prince once again in chapter 174, looking utterly terrified at the results of Griffith's incarnation, when one of his Tapasa guards points out Guts and asks him if the black-garbed warrior could be the one they were searching for. Salat dismisses such concerns and commands his men to attack and imprison all present there, seemingly confirming that he was in fact tracking the Falcon of Light, when suddenly Nosferatu Zod bursts through the remains of the Tower of Conviction. After laying waste to a few Kushan, he kneels to the entity that would, for a brief moment, become the object of everyone's desire and be revealed as the Kushan's main object, Griffith himself. Salat is the first to snap out of the trance and orders his entire force to capture Griffith, no matter how inhuman he might be, showing us that at least some in the Kushan knew of his nature. Before they could do anything, however, Zod slaughters all advancing forces and flies off from St. Albion with Griffith in tow. Salat also retreats, having failed once more in his personal mission, but turns out that the cost of his mistakes were going to be paid by Midland as a whole, because just as Guts' party thought they had survived through both the incarnation ceremony and the Kushan ambush, the entire Kushan main army descended upon the city, making the gears turn for the Demon King's eventual arrival. He is the King of Kings, whose conquest is as bloody as it is brutal. Emperor Ganishka's invasion of Midland. The Kushan war machine had begun the systematic conquest of Midland long before Salat returned to his immediate superior to report of his mission's status. They had captured 6 fortresses, including the capital city of Windham, and were now besieging Shet as Salat delivered the news of his failure. His immediate superior demeans him for being from a clan of exiles, and questions why the emperor allowed the Bakiraka to become a part of the campaign in the first place, calling it an act of blatant drunkenness. His boasts are silenced by Salat and his Tapasa, who stop an assassination attempt at the general's life dead in its tracks. Before he was about to take his leave, Salat revealed that the conquest of Midland had been approved due to an oracle received by the emperor, which caused him to order the capture of the Falcon. But as he was about to resume that mission, he was met by the Falcon himself. Griffith arrived at Shet and quickly liberated it from the Kushan army, thanks to the help of the apostles who arrived to serve him and his own profound existence. This happens across chapters 183 and 184, which is still nearly 50 chapters behind the first time that Emperor Ganishka's silhouette is actually even seen in the story. That's how much of a slow burn this reveal was. But when it did happen, it was as satisfactory scary and terrifying as it was promised, and then some. Chapter 230 of Berserk, simply titled Demon City, is a literal representation of what the capital city of Windham has become under Kushan occupation. Every building with a pointy structure has new decorations in the form of former Midlanders. Churches have been desecrated with the bodies of the very men who led communion within their walls. The air is thick with a mysterious fog, and hidden within it are demonic animals known as the Pishacha stalking the streets of Windham and preying upon any stupid or unlucky enough to be outside when they're on the prowl. A hidden team of liberators led by Sir Laban meets with the resistance group within the city led by Minister Foss. Both parties are set upon by Pishacha, but are saved by the trusted war demons of the reborn Band of the Falcon, who leave them with the message to resist until the arrival of the Falcon himself. As they leave, an entity off-panel comments that it can feel the inhuman presences moving about in the fog, but calls their actions and movements futile, for everything within that fog-filled domain lies in the palm of his hands. A silhouette forms on the pages that dares the vanguard of the Falcon to come within his demon castle, as it sits on a throne resting upon a mound of skulls. It is in chapter 231, nearly 200 chapters after the appearance of the first Kushan in the story, that we finally see their dread emperor at last. As Salat enters Windham with his Bakiraka to report to his master of their failure, we see the full visage of Ganishka for the first time, and it's an understatement to say that he is intimidating. His throne is fashioned from the idol of a goddess who looks like a combination of Durga and Kali, the Hindu mythology goddesses of war and death respectively. But it is the Emperor whose figure cuts deeper into our fears. He questions the worth of the Bakiraka clan in light of their failure, but is cognizant of the fact that capturing the Falcon of Oracle would not be an easy task, so he diminishes their role in the chase to mere surveillance, and Salat accepts his ruler's command and leaves his presence at once. His words make it seem as though he did this to keep the best interests of his clan at heart, but his thoughts reveal that it was more than practicality that moved his feet. Everywhere around Windham, all Salat saw were corpses, and he mused to himself that people were right to call his master the Dread Emperor. What he didn't know was just how close to the truth he really was. It appears as though none of Ganishka's human soldiers knew about his Pishacha armies or his Harashada sorcerer units, because even Salat's Tapasa aren't aware of their involvement in the conquest, and as the chapter comes to an end, it becomes evident why that is the case. The Emperor enters the chambers of his captive, Princess Charlotte, intent on securing his rule over Midland by siring a child on her. He chides her for not knowing that this too was a part of warfare, and prepares to have his way with her, when he suddenly pulls away upon hearing the name she cries out in her plea for help, Griffith. Ganishka looks around the room and finds it filled with embroidery of the Falcon of Light, and deduces that Charlotte must be the Falcon's lover. This amuses him, and he leaves the princess to her own devices whilst thinking about the very reason for his invasion of Midland. For a man accustomed to taking everything by force for such a long part of his life, Ganishka was growing weary of war. The prospect of coupling with Princess Charlotte made him think that he would finally find some excitement again, but the fact that she was Griffith's lover was far more invigorating to him than any carnal pleasure could have been. He thinks that the appearance of the Falcon was the signifier of the transfiguration of the world, and that all the reincarnated know that instinctively, revealing the fact that the great Emperor Ganishka was in fact an apostle. Cleaving to the Falcon was surely paramount for one such as him, because to demonkind, the presence of an angel of the God Hand was like being in the presence of God himself. But Ganishka was the great emperor of the Kushan Empire, the controller of the vastest territory in the entire world. Despite walking through fields of blood and filth to grasp the unclean world with his demonic hands, he would not relinquish it, even if it were demanded by his baser instincts. Ganishka resolves to reign over the world as a demon king and rebel against God, just as the Falcon's vanguard finally arrives in the demon city of Windham to face the man who should by rights be on their side. Engagement. The Emperor raises the stakes in his fight with the Falcon of Light. When Locus and his war demon unit of Lancers arrive at Windham to take down Ganishka's forces, the Emperor orders his men to greet them courteously, but soon notes the ineffectiveness of human soldiers against inhuman opponents as the Band of the Falcon cut through his soldiers with ease. He orders one of his men to unleash the Daka, demonic soldiers created with the evil essence he had harnessed from hell itself. They are unleashed upon his encroaching enemies after after luring them into a retrenchment. When the war demons express their confusion at the Daka's existence, the Emperor reveals himself and addresses their curiosity directly. Locus, the captain of the band of the Falcon's Lancers, steps forward and asks him if he is indeed the Great Emperor Ganishka, and the Great Emperor confirms his own identity for the valorous soldiers of the Falcon. The Kushan leader questions the mettle of the Falcon's beaks and talons, given the fact that they have roamed into a losing situation, and speculates that it might have been a move to gauge his own strength, when the Lancer captain cuts him short. Sir Locus's tone shifts to a far more sinister shade when he asks Ganishka why, as an apostle, he opposes the Master, to which the Emperor replies by calling him and the rest of the war demons knaves. Ganishka displays his supreme self-confidence by stating that he is the only fundamental in this world that belongs to him, and if anyone were to take it away, they would have to pay the price with their own life's blood, even if God himself came down to earth. He declares that he will instead desecrate God with his blood-stained hands, which whips up the war demons into a frenzy, because hearing an affront to their master was akin to the gravest sin possible for them. As Ganishka sicks his Daka on them, Salat learns the truth about how they were created. With the help of his Marahashi Senani Daiba, the Dread Emperor had created a massive device with the bodies of still alive, stitched together apostles and a vat of amniotic fluid. Pregnant women were lowered into these vats, and the evil surging within the apostles commingled with their fetuses to birth the demon spawn known as Daka, who are then raised by his Harashada to become demon warriors for his massive army of familiars. When the confrontation between the Daka and the war demons starts shifting in favor of the latter, when they assume their true apostle forms, Ganishka unleashes a tidal wave of Pishacha and Daka onto them, as he relishes the idea of the forthcoming demon dinner party, a spectacle befitting his grandiose demon castle. The Great Emperor is delighted by the splendid form that Locus displays as he slaughters hordes of Ganishka's approaching demon army, but questions how long he will be able to keep it up. He taunts the band of the Falcon to try and land a blow on him, which is when Irvine the Accurate takes a shot at him with his unerring bow, but for the first time in his own life, his bow fails him as Ganishka declares his attack futile and impertinent, before showing his own released form as a massive foggy thundercloud. He taunts the band of the Falcon for thinking they could stand up to him with such little evil lurking in their own hearts, and blasts them with lightning bolts that outright kill a sizable chunk of the war demons. Ganishka concludes that their frontal assault on his demon castle was, in the end, futile, for they would be unable to so much as touch him, which is when Locus reveals that their true objective wasn't killing him anyway. Griffith and Zod manage to use the distraction caused by his Lancers to save Princess Charlotte from her prison atop the Tower of Rebirth, which Ganishka only realizes after Locus calls for a hasty retreat. The Emperor is beyond livid at this loss and decides to take Midland's territories with even more brute force than before. He orders his wizard general Daiba to organize the conquest of the coastline of Ratanis in a single night, and manages to accomplish it without much resistance, clearing the path for his war galleasses to enter the port city and help launch his final invasion effort against Holy See territory. Ganishka himself enters Vratanis in his apostle form the night of an important ball organized by the Van Diemen family, where he declares war upon all of them and lures tiger Pishachas into the ball venue to pen and slaughter all gathered nobility in one fell swoop. This attempt fails, but Ganishka's invasion force manages to breach the defenses of Vratanis and begins their indiscriminate slaughter of everyone present in it. It is only thanks to Guts' party that the nobles gathered by the Van Diemen family were safe in the first place, and after cutting his way through to the docks of Ratanis, Guts faces off against and defeats Daiba, as well as Ganishka's strongest Pishacha known as Kundalini. The Great Emperor is deeply insulted by this massive blunder caused by his most trusted general and immediately manifests in his apostle form to berate Daiba for his failures. When Daiba starts making excuses for himself, Ganishka zaps him with a thunderbolt, which he is somehow able to survive. The Emperor bids his wizard to scurry off before taking over the fight with Guts personally. Ganishka declares himself impressed by Guts and Serpico's tenacity, noting to himself that war is not a thing to take lightly after all if a mere 2 warriors have taken down so many of his Pishacha army. He also notes that Guts has the scent of a connection to the world of Inhumans, sensing his brand of the sacrifice before seeing it, but mistakes him for Griffith's ally and proceeds to blast him with lightning. The first strike is stymied by Serpico's sylph cloak and blade, but the second blasts the ship that they were standing on and blows Shirki's luminous body back into her physical one. Guts writhes with pain, but Ganishka is bewildered by the fact that even after suffering his lightning twice, the warrior is still not dead. He thinks to himself that no matter how many lightning bolts he has to unleash, in the end, his enemies always fall prostrate before him, but is left shell-shocked by the fact that Guts used the Dragon Slayer as a conductor to survive the attack. Ganishka openly commends the Black Swordsman for his inhuman tenacity, and once again inquires whether he is one of them, a demon working for the Falcon of Light, which causes Guts to spit venom in his face at the mere suggestion. That is when Ganishka notices Guts' brand of sacrifice, and realizes what the man he is facing truly is, a purebred human who has been on an insane quest to take on the realm of the Inhumans by himself. Surprisingly, or perhaps not, Ganishka is so impressed by this fact that he outright offers Guts the chance to join him. He does not know that it was Femto who gave him his brand, but he knows what it is associated with, and informs Guts that he too is an enemy of the God Hand. Ganishka tells him that right now, nearly every apostle in the world had gathered to Griffith's banner, and joining up with the Great Emperor could allow Guts to have his revenge whilst covering himself in glory. He deems the Black Swordsman malice and madness to be agreeable for the filthy, blood-stained world over, which he rules and thus demands an answer from him, but not before shocking Daiba once more for his impertinence. Guts is impressed by the fact that an apostle would stand up to the God Hand and commends Ganishka for that, but in the end, he has no interest in a fight between two monsters, so he rejects the Emperor's offer. As Ganishka prepares to take Guts' life in exchange for the countless Pishachagana he had slain, and his demon armies nearly overrun Ratanis, the Band of the Falcon appears to liberate the city, and Griffith's flying war demons, led by Zod, assault Ganishka directly. The Demon King redirects his attention towards the insects that serve his luminous enemy and burns multiple apostles out of the sky with lightning bolts, but fails to take down Nosferatu Zod in one shot. In fact, it takes Ganishka at least a good 3 strikes to immobilize the Immortal One, and even a coordinated attack from the war demons aimed at scattering his form to the wind is to no avail, because as long as the fog existed, everything was in the palm of his hands. That illusion was shattered when Guts unexpectedly teamed up with Zod to strike Ganishka through his released form, pinpointing his astral body and running it through with the Dragon Slayer. Wounded and in terrible pain, the Great Emperor is forced to retreat as Daiba orders his Harashada to command the demonic creatures under their control to commit suicide, so none of their illicit sorcery fell into the enemy's hands. But a single combat loss is not enough to deter Ganishka from his conquest, and he unleashes the main Kushan army, some 200,000 strong, onto the city of Ratanis with only one command: to purge his opponents. As the war elephants and the organized ranks of the Kushan began cutting through the Holy Sea Alliance, nearly decimating it, the reborn Band of the Falcon joins the battle. Griffith's war demons easily mow down Ganishka's ranks, decimating them with no hesitation. A general reports to the Emperor that their war elephants have gone rampant and can no longer be controlled, and Ganishka is livid at the prospect of losing a battle that by rights he should be winning. But mixed with that look of disgust is just a slight suggestion of fear, and it becomes evident why the Great Demon King was a touch fearful of Griffith's approach in chapter 282. After the war demons are able to cleave open a path for the Falcon of Light to approach his enemy face to face for the first time, it is Ganishka who is terrified of Griffith, not the other way around. He realizes that he is trembling in the presence of the being who is his instinctual master, and when Griffith speaks to him, his mind nearly succumbs to Femto's refreshing voice, which is both a comfort and a source of thirst and hunger, a source of madness. Griffith instinctively senses Ganishka's suffering as a god hand incarnate, and reaches to touch him, which causes the Great Emperor to panic. He thinks that if Griffith's hand touches him, he will give up everything he has worked his entire life for, and that, to him, is unacceptable. Ganishka unleashes his apostle form and goes on a rant about he is the one who takes, not the one who is taken from, and how even if Griffith is the Falcon of Light, approaching him unaided was the height of folly. Ganishka prepares to strike down his master with all his might when Griffith uses his spatial manipulation to cause the Emperor's mobile palace to crumble. He then summons a strong gust of wind and sends it right through Ganishka's apostle form. Because his transformation was a combination of his astral body and wind and water elementals, the Great Emperor was unable to hold his form for too long and was brought to heel at the feet of the Falcon of Light. Just when he thought his entire campaign had been meaningless, Ganishka was given one last chance at redemption. Griffith said that because he couldn't capture Ganishka in his fog form, and because Ganishka would not be able to advance on Ratanis any longer thanks to the Band of the Falcon, their battle was at a stalemate. He proposed a final showdown in the capital city of Windham, and that was enough to give the Emperor a final wind in his his weathered sails. It took all his strength to do it, but Ganishka stood defiant in the face of God once again, and declared that their showdown shall be in his demon city, and he shall meet the Falcon with a battle line unlike the world has ever seen. He signals a retreat and withdraws his forces from Ratanis, going back to Windham to prepare his final plan to defeat the hand that made him in the first place. But it is evident by now that without some kind of divine miracle, he is sure to lose this upcoming battle. So in a mad gamble made in desperation, he decides that he shall ascend once again, thereby sealing his own fate. The beginning and the end of the dreaded great Kushan Emperor, Ganishka and Shiva. Enraged by his defeat at the hands of the god he had vowed to desecrate, Ganishka commits himself to plans that even his half-crazy wizard general Daiba labels as madness. Despite there being no precedent for such a thing, the emperor has decided to submerge himself within Daiba's man-made behelit to force a second ascension. The contraption that was made out of living apostles had only ever been used to transfer evil energy to a life form that had not yet matured. There was no telling what effect it would have on someone who had already tasted the power of evil once. But in Ganishka's defense, and we can't believe we're saying this, he had a point. Griffith stood before him committing acts that can only be labeled as miraculous with no effort, but his mere presence nearly broke Ganishka's sanity and caused him to give in. His apostle instincts told him that they were nowhere near being on the same level, and so, in order to win, drastic measures were needed. And this is where we stop advocating his logic, because what happened next can only be described as insanity. Before the Kushan army returned to their demon city, the children of Windham had a prophetic dream that told them, on a moonless night, the fog surrounding the city would disappear. It wouldn't return until the next day, and everyone had to escape Windham by daybreak, because come dawn, a giant monster would appear that would block out the sun and rain death and despair on all in its vicinity. But ultimately, the Falcon of Light would defeat it too, and usher in a dawn that never ends in a brand new world. Turns out, the monster they were referring to was Ganishka himself. As soon as the great emperor lowered himself into the man-made behelit, all the fog in the streets of Windham was sucked into it, including every living thing that walked in it. Pishacha and Kushan soldiers alike were gobbled up by Daiba's life's work, and as the sorcerer erected a barrier to protect himself, he realized that it was Ganishka who was doing this in an attempt to transcend apostlehood. The old sage comments on the extremely taboo nature of such things and awaits for the arrival of something sinister from the bowels of the astral world, and arrive it does the very next morning, just as the escaping children had predicted. Chapter 295 opens with Daiba running out of the dome in which the man-made behelit was housed, muttering to himself about what he saw in there and denying its existence in the same breath, as we cut to the source of his terror. What lies in that place is Kentaro Miura's personal dedication to H.P. Lovecraft. Turns out, Ganishka had managed to transcend alright, but he had been turned into a Cthulhu-like being with multiple faces and eyes all over his faces and noses and faces, and you get the picture. As the former emperor of the Kushan Empire breaks out of the dome, he tells his general that in that infernal abyss he had finally obtained it, true power. Ganishka's faces explode through the dome and shock Daiba into wonder as he marvels at the size of the manifestation he was witnessing, but it was only a fraction of it. Being choked by the foundations of the dome, Ganishka tears through the streets of Windham, revealing thousands of arms and the fact that the many faces we just saw were technically the head of this thing that he had become. Breaking the entire capital city apart as he rose through the clouds, Ganishka came to tower over everything and everyone, and when his form blocked the sun, the end of the world of reason came to be. Everyone in the physical realm of Berserk saw it, and those who couldn't felt its malevolence resonate through their bones. Ganishka had become an elder god-like figure that was simply given the name Shiva, the name of the Hindu god of destruction. After transforming into an eldritch abomination, Ganishka's thinking capacity was reduced to his basest instincts. When he walked, he remarked that he had feet for trampling and crushing his enemies. But when he saw those enemies, he thought they were little insects. With one step, Ganishka crushed hundreds of humans underneath his foot. But to his deluded mind, it seemed as if the insects had turned into blooming red flowers. Ganishka's demented brain found the sight beautiful. Daiba flew up to Ganishka's head and tried to tell him he was killing his own soldiers, but to the mind of the abomination, he was nothing but a puny bug. To kill the bug, Ganishka started spewing fire in all directions, which rained down like the flames of hell, causing onlookers to remark that this looked like the end of the world. And inside the deepest layers of the entity dubbed Shiva's astral being, the man known as Ganishka cried out for someone to save him from his loneliness. Within the recess of his fragmented mental mental state, Ganishka called out for his soldiers, called out for Daiba, called out for anyone who would listen, but no one answered him. In the end, he saw a light rise over the horizon and remembered that it was the thing he had always wanted. As he made his way towards it, and by it we mean Griffith, the people he had crushed underneath his feet rose again as pseudo-apostles, and these mindless beings charged the band of the Falcon. Their insurmountable numbers and Sonia's power as a medium caused the unthinkable to happen, and Daiba was there to witness that as well. Apostles are an affront to humanity. They hate and are hated, kill and are killed in an endless spiral. But somehow, under Griffith, humans and apostles were fighting side by side. As the band of the Falcon rallied and counterattacked Shiva's pseudo-apostles, Griffith mounted Zod and made his way over to the creature's head, and we finally got the origin story for the demon emperor Ganishka of the Kushan. Chapter 303 is one of the saddest chapters in Berserk, and it gives us the backstory of a literal demonic tyrant. Go figure. Growing up as the eldest child of a royal family, Ganishka lived in a den of vipers. At the age of 6, his mother poisoned him because she wanted his younger brother to succeed him. He survived, got rid of the competition, and his mother went after his brother in short order. The royalty and the aristocracy flip-flopped their stance towards him to their convenience, but he survived that den of vipers by honing his own venomous soul to a fine edge and cutting a bloody path through them. When he became old enough to be named heir to the throne, he knelt at his father's feet, ostensibly seeking validation, but all he received was the same look of suspicion and fear that had plagued his entire life. His Majesty was found dead during a hunting accident that was actually arranged by Ganishka himself. As king, he continued to wage war both on the battlefield and in political court, ruthlessly ridding himself of any competition out of a deep-seated fear of developing any sort of meaningful attachment. He shunned his wife and son to devote himself to world conquest and inadvertently repeated the same cycle of fear and loathing. When he returned to the capital city for a victory feast several years after setting out to claim the world, he was poisoned by his son. When he didn't immediately die, his terrified progeny loosed the castle guards on him with the same look of fear that he once had at his age. In his despair, he reaches out for his most prized possession, a behelit, and activates it out of his deep desire to live and his deep fear of forming meaningful relationships. We learn that in his early years, Ganishka received the behelit from a certain wandering sage whose character design reveals him to be Daiba before he became the great emperor's right-hand man. In the lowest moment of his existence, this stone he received from his future Senani activated and summoned the God Hand, to whom Ganishka offered his son as a sacrifice in exchange for apostlehood. The mad emperor thinks that lightless is what life is and is supposed to be, but at that moment he's approached by the Falcon of Light himself, Griffith, in his released form of Femto. Ganishka thinks to himself that the light is bright and warm, everything he has ever wanted, but if he touches it, he will burn himself. Femto encourages him to embrace the light, telling him that those who give off the brightest light exist in the deepest shadow, and extends his hand to touch what seems to be the nexus point of Ganishka's brain. The great emperor closes his eyes, letting the warmth of the light envelop him, and that itself signals the end of the world. At that moment in time, the Skull Knight appears and attacks Femto with his sword of Behelits, but the God Hand member is able to manipulate its space-distorting stroke and uses it to slice Ganishka's head open. All the evil astral energy that the great emperor had gathered up in his Shiva form comes spilling forth from his corpse and puts the entire globe into an interstice. This incident is called the Great Roar of the astral world, and is what was responsible for merging the physical and astral worlds once again after 1,000 years, giving humanity what it truly desired: Fantasia. Legacy of Ganishka and Marvelous Verdict. In the aftermath of the Great Roar, Ganishka's soul must have left the physical world, but his body remained as the world spiral tree which acts as the anchor of the global interstice. Because two overlapping dimensions are now essentially one, the sunken capital of Supreme King Geiserik of yore is brought back to the surface and refashioned into Griffith's utopian capital city, Falconia. The branches of the world spiral tree also allow those with a profound sense of the astral world to travel anywhere in the world within seconds. And the reborn band of the Falcon has used the Stonehenge-esque relics they've found out on patrol to create numerous shortcuts back to Falconia. Even in death, Ganishka's impact continues to literally resonate through the world of Berserk, and we think that is a fitting conclusion to a character who managed to achieve so much evil stuff in so few appearances. Great Emperor Ganishka was the living personification of a tyrant, terrified of his own mortality and the fact that he even thought thought he could win against a God Hand member who looks at apostles as worthless servants is frankly preposterous. But it's the fact that he went through with it anyway like an absolute mad lad that makes him one of the most iconic Berserk antagonists and personally one of our favorite manga villains of all time. But what about you? Did you like the wild journey that was Emperor Ganishka's life? And if you didn't, which part was it specifically that bothered you? Let us know in the comments section below, and we'll catch you in the next video. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. This has been Corey Whelan for Marvelous Videos. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.